Hello and welcome to the 310 to Left podcast. Glad you could join us. I'm Adam Pellerin alongside Alex Speier of the Boston Globe. I am honored to be on the 310 to Left podcast, to be a part of it. I've listened, I've watched, we've played plenty of clips on the pre and post game show, which I've tossed to, but I've never actually gotten to co-host the show with the great Alex Speier. So I just need to catch my breath. Okay, I'm good to go. How are we doing, Alex?
I am honored and flattered by that, but of course, your flattery will get you nowhere. Insofar as we all know that this is your disappointment that it's me and not Tom Caron has been known in many circles. I respect that. Tom is a Maine Hall of Famer. He's probably in Maine right now, chopping down a tree. But here you are with me, and I'm grateful for your presence.
I was actually going to say the same to you, Alex, how disappointed you were that TC wasn't the one sitting at this desk behind this mic. But we will carry on, my friend. But we got a great show lined up. We have Red Sox hitting coach Pete Fatse, who is going to join us in just a couple of moments. But as excited as I am to be here to talk about the Red Sox have not been an exciting team to watch, Alex, and it has been a struggle for this team really since the start of the series against the Diamondbacks, when they returned home after a good road trip against the Astros and the Orioles. They get swept by the Diamondbacks. They go 2-3 against the Blue Jays at Fenway Park, and then they kick off this road trip against the Tigers with a win. And it's been 5 straight losses after that. The offense just has not produced like it had really for much of the season, most of the season, especially at the start of the second half. They've hit a roadblock.
This has been a pretty wild second half, honestly. We have seen different aspects of the team in full-on collapse at different times. And, I think that good teams, more established teams, deeper teams tend to be able to establish a reasonable baseline when they struggle. And in the case of the Red Sox this year, we have not seen them able to maintain a set. We saw them do such a good job of that early in the season, right? There was the 3 straight weeks where they were 500 all the time, and it was maybe this is their baseline. Then they took off on that hot streak, and it was they also have upside beyond the 500 mark. But what we've seen is a bullpen in complete collapse coming out of the All-Star break, and then now more recently we've seen an offense that has collapsed completely. And in between, we've seen different patches of the fielding collapsing in pretty pronounced fashion, and just letting in unearned runs in a way that essentially no other team in baseball does. And so I think that those elements, to me, those are arguably hallmarks of a younger team, one where you have players who find it more difficult to make the in-season adjustments in order to maintain a level of play throughout the course of the season. But I don't know, that's speculative, and that's, there's also a case to be made that young players should be more physically resilient and be in a better position to remain consistent throughout the course of the season. So I don't know, Adam, what do you think? You've also been, keenly aware of the fact that this is something that's happened not just this year, but this has been a problem for the Red Sox over the course of really since 2019.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the numbers in the first half of the season since 2019, they've been above 500 each of those years. I mean, it was just barely, last couple of years. I mean, they were 5 games over 500 last year, 3 games over 500 the year before in 2022. They were 20 games over 500 in 21. Of course, they made the postseason that year. In 2019, they were 8 games over 500, but they've been below 500, or at least close to the 500 mark. That 2021 season, they were 2 games over 500 in the second half of the year. They ended up making the postseason on the final day of the year, but they've had woeful Augusts in that span as well, below 500, including this season. They had a miserable September last year. They were 9-18, and you can't really put your finger on any one problem. You could point to a number of different things. It's like the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? And we were talking about that before we came on. It just seems like there's just once you patch up a leak here, there's another leak springing over there, and you put bubble gum on that and that and that, and by the time you're done. You're at the bottom of the sea, and that just seems like where the Red Sox are at right now, Alex. And again, we talk about the offense coming out of the second half of the year. I mean, they had scored the second most runs in baseball going into that series against the Diamondbacks, and then they end up getting swept in that series. And since then, they've scored 2.5 runs per game. They've scored, I believe, the second fewest runs in baseball over the last 15 days, fifth highest strikeout percentage in that time. They're 26th in home runs and 30th in weighted on base average. And meanwhile, the starters, who are 23rd in ERA coming out of the gate before that Diamondback series, they're sixth. And again, it's a small sample size. The one thing that's been consistent is the bullpen. It's been consistently bad, unfortunately, for the Red Sox. And you had so much optimism after the deadline acquiring Lucas Sims and Luis Garcia, and they've contributed to what has been a really struggling bullpen.
That was a lot of great information, but I've actually been distracted the whole time thinking about everything everywhere all at once and how that might manifest itself in the middle of a baseball game. Like, are the Red Sox swinging at a pitch that is all of a sudden disappearing into a wormhole and arriving in an alternate universe in the catcher's mitt for a strike? Are they swinging into the wormhole and thus their bats are being transferred into an alternate dimension? These are very complicated questions to address, Adam. But I think that your point about the team struggles in August is an astute one, and I do think that it's not that hard to put a finger on what's been going on, which is they haven't been a team with a ton of depth, particularly on the pitching side, to reinforce down the stretch in these last several years, nor have they been a team of great ambition at the trade deadline in order to have major upgrades. Obviously, we saw an effort to reinforce some areas of weakness this year in the form of James Paxton, in the form of Luis Garcia, in the form of Lucas Sims, as you pointed out. But this wasn't like the highest rental end of the trade deadline. Sims and Garcia, I expected both of them to be able to stabilize the Red Sox late innings March. The fact that they haven't, I think, comes as anyone, like, I think it's very fair to be surprised by that. But they also didn't represent the huge upgrades of like an AJ Puck, for instance, with the D-backs, where that was one of the highest octane arms available down the stretch. And that's not the caliber of guy that the Red Sox were going for. So you combine those two things. The Red Sox have not been a team that's been deep in a homegrown pitching pipeline capable of providing reinforcements either in the bullpen or the rotation in the second half of the season. Obviously, we have seen an increasing number of homegrown contributors to them, but usually they've come up and become contributors earlier in the season. They haven't been available as the second half side. So then you have to pursue bigger names or bigger upgrades in the trade market, and that is just not something that they've done in recent years, partly because of where they've been in the standing. They haven't exactly, aside from 2021, they haven't been in an obvious situation where you necessarily push in some of the bigger chips. But then on top of that, they've also been in a very conscientious build with regards to their farm system. They weren't going to give up some of their better prospects, and so as a result, the upgrades have been modest, and this year, surprisingly disappointing, I would say.
Yeah, and part of it too, Alex, is the inability to win games at home, and that's something that you can't quite put your finger on either. I mean, I know you had mentioned not going all in at the trade deadline, the lack of pitching depth over the last few years, but not being able to win games at home. I mean, this Red Sox team, for much of this season, one of the best road teams in all of baseball. I mean, they went 1-5 on this recent road trip, but you can't look at any other road trip where they had that bad of a record, and so you sort of point to the home record as being a point of like what is going on, with their inability to win at home. You ask people, and they just don't quite know how to answer that question.
Yeah, I've tried to explore that question. I think that Alex Cora has talked a couple of times about the fact that he thinks that there's an absence of right-handed power in the lineup. So they haven't been in a position to take advantage of the unique dimensions of Fenway, right? And the one area that they were adding to from a position side this year, they added Danny Jansen, saying, well, he's going to be able to pull the ball in the air and take advantage of Fenway. That hasn't happened. right? Like he has not been able to contribute power. There are other ways in which Danny Jansen has been a nice contributor in terms of his work with the pitching staff, but offensively he hasn't been able to address that very left-handedness of the lineup that's probably contributed to a relatively low home run total. At the same time, there's been a lot of situational execution issues for the Red Sox on both sides of the ball, right? The errors that they're making at home, mind-boggling. They're more than doubling the number of unearned runs allowed by visitors at Fenway Park. They are giving up a ton of homers with runners on base, and they aren't hitting a ton of homers with runners on base. Like I think that the Red Sox and the teams they faced at Fenway Park are basically dead even in terms of bases empty homers, but there's a significant disparity in terms of homers with runners on base. That ain't good. That's not ideal. So I think that there is weirdness to it, and it's hard to say, is it that they don't feel comfortable at home? It's from that, like, the underlying roots of the problem, really difficult to say, but it has been a massive and glaring issue that's faced them over the course of the course of this difficult second half.
Yeah, and over the last couple of weeks, it's been the offensive struggles that have really stood out, especially on this road trip where they scored a total of 8 runs over their 5-game losing streak. And so, Red Sox offense has been very good this year. It's been elite at times. And so we'll see if they can get back to that. And one man who may have the answer to that question as to why they've been struggling and why, when they've been successful, why is that, is Red Sox hitting coach Pete Fatse, who joined us on the 310 to Left podcast. Well, Pete, thanks for coming on with us. I know you just got back from the road trip. You're probably running on fumes right now, and taking the opportunity to talk to us is greatly appreciated on behalf of Alex as well. So we thank you for that. Obviously there's been it's been a rough couple of weeks offensively, and Alex and I were talking beforehand. It's like the human element of this must exist for you too, right? I mean, do you sleep? Do you loss of appetite? I mean, when the offense is struggling, what's it like for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, obviously things haven't gone our way the last few weeks. I think the reality is, and this is something that I've just learned being around the game for so long, is you have to be willing to ride the waves. It's such a long season. There's so many ups and downs. There's so many great moments. There's so many heartbreaking moments. You really have to try and stay in the moment as best you can. I think that's where we joke, but the running comes into play. The running is what keeps us consistent, the AC, the running club. But you have to find something that keeps you grounded and keeps you going every single day. And obviously I'm very fortunate to be able to go to work, do something we love. So got to keep that perspective also.
How tricky is it to kind of twist the dials when you guys have been trying to find the right way of approaching work, right? At a time when offense has been difficult to come by. You had the days of skipping on-field BP, essentially, right? Like you've had some later report times at the, how do you approach the question of with a struggling offense, finding ways of kind of galvanizing it?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think throughout the course of the season, you have to take the players' physical demands, where they're at, into consideration. Obviously, some guys are banged up, some guys are physically tired. Obviously, we work with medical and all the various departments to make sure that guys are feeling good. But aside from that, the work really comes down to preparation. We're always trying to make sure that we're prepared for the start of that night. Our bench guys, making sure they understand who the potential matchups are going to be. And then we're constantly training. I'm trying to make sure that guys are honing in on, obviously, their strengths in preparation for that night, but also challenging their weaknesses to a degree to make sure that we're continuing to develop. That's been a priority of ours this year, something Alex and Craig have really harped on and made public. And I think it's something we've always taken pride in, but it's you talk about at a time where offense has been hard to come by. It's things we have to kind of double down on now. What that looks like on a given day, it really just comes down to the schedule and how much we're going to have these guys on our feet. Obviously, travel plays a role too. But really it just comes down to making sure we're in a position to attack the opponent that night.
You come out of the All-Star break and, the offense, is rolling. Unfortunately, the pitching had struggled. But the offense was second in baseball in terms of runs scored going into that series against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Since then, over the last couple of weeks, as we started off the interview with, it's been close to the bottom of the league. What stood out to you about the offensive struggles, really starting with the series against the Diamondbacks?
Yeah, I think first it goes without saying. I mean, they have a good club, right? And I think their starting pitching, they executed really well. I felt like they didn't give us a whole lot to hit over the middle of the plate, which makes our job really challenging. And I think, coming off of the All-Star break, I mean, really for us, it's been the same mentality. I mean, we talked about 9-on-1 in spring training, passing the baton, the importance of going pitch to pitch. I know that, for me, those are things that are always in play. But I think they did a good job, credit to their pitching staff, of limiting action for us. I think one of the things that I've noticed from our guys too is just trying to be as good as we can early in count with our swing decisions. I think teams this time of year, especially when you're playing teams trying to get into the postseason specifically, they're attacking your weakness from pitch one. It's something that we've seen throughout the last few series. So you really have the margin for mistakes is really small. So for us, it's about making sure the game plan is tight. And then working again to try and combat that as best we can. But in a time of the year where you're facing really good teams that are trying to get into the postseason or trying to solidify where they're going to be in the postseason, it's really about that margin for error. So I think for us, the one thing is we've been a team that's been able to get on base. I mean, we've slugged throughout the year, a lot of double slug. We've been top 10 in homers for the majority of the year. But we're a team that has the ability to get on base. And I think for me, obviously when we're punching out a little bit more, that doesn't help our opportunity for that. And I think for me, it doesn't really help the opportunity to create big innings. But I think it's really just putting ourselves in position to get on base as best we can.
You mentioned the strikeouts there, right? And there's been a run of a lot of big strikeout games, right? Double-digit strikeouts. I see you almost wincing, right? Like those have to be, as a hitting coach, you care about putting the ball in play. You care about making solid contact. There's obviously been some slug, even there's been a little bit of risk reward with regards to the offensive approach. But when you look at the strikeout rate, third highest in Major League Baseball, you guys are striking out at a 25% rate. That's always the one that drives everyone crazy, even though hitting is harder than ever. Putting the ball in play is harder than ever. Do you think that is a sign of a young team that's, with guys still learning their approaches? Do you think that is just that's not taking advantage of the early count opportunities? And then when you get into two strike counts, you're playing defense often against just elite pitches. What do you think has been at the root of this high strikeout offense?
Yeah, I think you said it. I mean, for me, strikeouts, obviously there's no production that you can generate from a ball not put in play, right? So striking out for me is, it's not something that we like. We obviously understand where we're at in that regard, and it's something we've battled all season, even when we've been very productive. There's been times where we scored a bunch of runs, we've also punched out. I think for me, it's a combination of all things, really. I mean, like you said, you look at league-wide OPS, pitching is really good, right? They're throwing their best stuff from pitch one. They're looking for punch outs. They're hunting for swing and miss. Pitch design has created this atmosphere where missing barrels is extremely valuable and everybody's chasing it. So I think if you have holes within your game or there is miss within your game, I think that gets exposed. I think the thing that I try and focus on is how you get to two strikes. There's some hitters that are overly passive and they're taking pitches early, hittable pitches early, putting themselves behind. Is it a game planning thing? Are teams using secondary stuff early to slow you down, speed you up with heaters late? It's being mindful of how guys get to two strikes. And then the other piece, as I mentioned earlier, is when you're facing teams with really good stuff, knowing the areas that you do damage is important, or at least make impact is important, because teams are going to go to your blues. They're going to go to the cold zones as quickly as they can. So again, it's being mindful of all those things. And I do think there's an element of, sure, when you have some younger hitters, refining approach, getting acclimated to how guys are pitching you. I think that's part of the learning curve. And obviously we've had some ups and downs in that space, but for the majority been happy with some of the progress. It's just something that we have to continue to get better at because, like you said, that's not a stat you want to be in the top 5 on.
a lot of fans who watch, the conventional thinking is with two strikes, as you're talking about, and guys with just nasty stuff nowadays. But the conventional wisdom is, well, choke up, shorten up, go the other way, do all of those things. Why isn't that as much a part of the philosophy now as it maybe used to be?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily. I think everybody makes physical and mental adjustments, right? Whether you're shifting your fastball timing to a certain part of the field, right? Backing up the fastball to give yourself a chance to see the breaking ball more. Whether that's simplifying. I mean, we've seen it with some guys over time, like, widening out a touch. You brought up the choking up, and like guys do make subtle adjustments. I think the reality is when you get to two strikes, it's really about eliminating as much chase as you can, because everybody's throwing strike to ball, right? So everybody wants to throw the breaking ball. It looks like it's a strike and finishes off the plate. So as much as it's about, prioritizing contact, it's really putting yourself in position to see the ball as best you can. And I think you probably see guys stick with a little bit more of their conventional swing, or their what would look to be their conventional swing, because that's their mode for seeing the ball comfortably. And I think that's the priority in those moments. So if you don't see guys super wide or super choked up, I think that also it can put you in a defensive mindset where now I'm just trying to defend the zone, where you need to make sure you're in a position to see the ball as best you can. So I think that's a little bit of kind of, it's nuanced for the individual, what they're most comfortable with.
Your offense has been, as we mentioned, like, it's been cold lately. It was very hot before that. You guys right now, I think, are averaging 4.7 runs per game, which is upper half of the big leagues. It's no longer top, but right around 10 or 11, ahead of a couple of playoff teams like the Astros, Guardians, and Astros and Guardians. At the same time, like, the fact this has been kind of a microcosm. Like, it's been an offense that's been subject to ups and downs, and a lot of the ups have happened on the road this year, not on this most recent series. A lot of the colder spells have happened at home. You guys are fourth in the big leagues in homers on the road. You guys are 20th in the big league in homers at home. Do you have a lineup that's built to take advantage? Where the players are ideally suited for a Fenway fast break offense?
Yeah, I think we're capable of it. I think one of the things that we try and harp on is, obviously we want to hit homers are great, right? But I think for us, it's always about using the whole field. Fenway Park, especially with our lefties, like the ability to use the wall is important. Obviously right field, 420 in the corner. You have that 380 marker deep right. There's been a heck of a lot of balls that have been hit really hard that are outs in those parts of the ballpark. I also think too, I don't know. I think for us, practicing using the wall it's been an important thing. You see Jaron take advantage of it a lot. Rafi's done a great job going backside, using the wall as best we can. A lot of our lefties, it's been a priority conversation for us, just as much as, yes, we want to make sure we're doing damage to the pull side in the air. That's definitely a part of a productive offense, but making sure we use the whole field is important also too. So that might play into a little bit, but I think in general, we're trying to use Fenway Park to our advantage. That goes both sides, lefties and righties.
You talk about, obviously working with the players, focusing on swing decisions, all the things that go into it. But, when the offense is struggling like this, the last couple of weeks, how does your role as hitting coach sort of almost change into, therapist, right? Or being a wellness coach and trying to encourage these guys as well, because there's a huge mental aspect to hitting as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing, and this goes without saying, right, on the offensive side of the ball, it's all reactionary. It's purely reactionary. You're not the one that's dictating what's being thrown necessarily. And I think that you have to empower guys to control what they can control, right? When you're going good and you're seeing the ball well and you're in attack mode, or you're on go, as we'll say, you're trying to control that moment as best you can. Sometimes when things aren't going as well offensively, we tend to sit back and we let the reaction kind of play us into more of a defensive mindset where we start to defend the zone. I think that's kind of the common, I guess that's one of the common talking points, that when you find yourself in positions like this, you have to be the one to punch. You have to be the one to punch first. I think of the game we faced Corbin Burns, what was that, maybe 2 weeks ago on the road, and we kind of came out with a game plan to take away the cutter, and we went after him, forced him to his secondary. We got a bunch of mistakes. We drove up his pitch count, run total hits, and we took advantage of him. But I think sometimes when an offense is struggling, you have to remind them that we are on go. We are the ones that are dictating the action. At least shift the mindset back to that, as opposed to just sitting back and kind of just feeling like you're not necessarily hopeless, but you're in a position of reaction all the time. Just because hitting is so hard, we have to prioritize something, try and take something away. So continue to encourage our guys to be aggressive in the areas they want to swing. That's important.
Is that a harder point to get across with the younger players because they're still trying to figure it out at this level rather than the veterans who have been there, they've been in the trenches before?
Yeah, I think no one's immune to some of the stressors that go along to when you're struggling. No one's immune to it. I think it's all about learning coping mechanisms and how you just work through those things, whether it's visualization, self-talk. Sometimes we just try and keep it light. Sometimes the atmosphere in the cage. I learned this a long time ago from I say a long time ago, but from one of my mentors and former colleagues, Tim Hires, right? Like there's sometimes where nothing said is the best thing said. And you just are there for encouragement and you try and create the atmosphere, the energy that you want. And at the end of the day, those are the guys that have to go in the box. So it's about making them feel like they're the best player in the world that day. So there's a time, to talk mechanics. There's a time to talk approach. There's a time to talk game plan. There's a time to talk offensive strategy. And then there's a time to just sit back and listen, right? And empower these guys because they are some of the best in the big leagues. I mean, we have a phenomenal offense. It's just a matter of continuing to support them. And sometimes, like I said, as coaches, you may feel helpless at times because you just want it so bad for the group. But sometimes taking a step back and just empowering them and just being there for whatever they need, that's the most important thing.
In that vein, you talk about someone like Devers taking advantage of left field, and also figuring out how to navigate slumps. Rafi is in one, and we all know that he's dealing with some physical maladies with the shoulders. It's interesting to try to find ways of identifying where that shows up, right? Like of his 200 fastest swings this year, only 4 of them have come since August 20th, right? We now have bat speed data in the public sphere. You're seeing the bat speed seems to be slowing, with a couple of select exceptions. Where do you look as a hitting coach when you're trying to identify a player's ability to work through injury and how to work with him through what he's got on a given day? The punch isn't as strong right now. What do you look to when you're trying to diagnose whether or not do you just trust the player based on his feel, what he's saying to the trainers or to you guys? Do you look for markers, either physical signs in the swing or things like bat speed data? At what point do you say okay, this injury is weighing on him in a way that is really impacting his performance?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, right? I think one thing about our group is that we do have access to a lot of really good information. So yeah, bat speed for me is a flag. We've seen that the last 2 months. He had a really productive July, but his bat speed was also down at that point. So it's something that I follow because it alerts other things, right? I think bat speed it's obviously an indicator and it's a strong indicator for performance. But for me, it's important to get under the hood and getting an understanding of why that may be happening. There's a variety of reasons. Obviously, you mentioned some of the physical things. But with Rafi specifically, I mean, this guy is a warrior. I mean, he posts, he plays, he cares. I've had the pleasure of working with, this is my 5th year with him. So at this point, I have a pretty good understanding of how he thinks. I think what we're prioritizing with him, obviously, is we have to, there's elements of the swing that he's working to get right. I also think too, there's elements of the perspective. He's hit a bunch of balls hard too, and there hasn't been any luck recently too. And obviously, as much as the physical side and the swing side are part of it too, that's also a real mental hurdle too. When you're hitting the ball 105, you can't find a gap. Even when you square it up, it just compounds a little bit. So kind of trying to shift, make sure there's some perspective there. But with Rafi, it's about using, obviously we have to use our eyes. We have to listen to how he's feeling, what he's saying to us. That's obviously a very critical element to this whole thing. And then look to apply our coaching, insights as best we can. And right now it's trying to get him, you mentioned using the big part of the field, but just get to a place where he feels like he can compress the ball the best way he can and match that up with the game plan. You saw McGill last night kind of come right after him with the cutters hard in. I know he got that sack fly to right, had to really pull his hands inside, but just little things like that where we're trying to give him as much insight to help him when he gets in the box. That's really important.
I am curious. You talk about when you talk about giving feedback on what a hitter is actually doing. I know that in the minors they place a huge emphasis on xWOBA, expected weighted on base average. Basically identifying the quality of contact is the most important thing, and its expected outcomes rather than necessarily what's happening in a game. How about at the big league level where results are the thing that matters the most? Like, do players care about xWOBA or are they like, no, 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 no? Like, yeah.
I think xWOBA is it's a phenomenal stat when you're looking at from a projection standpoint, right? So batted balls that are hit hard at certain angles, they're obviously going to produce results over time, and that's obviously what our priority is, right? We're looking at this thing at 162, so looking at impact is very important to how we view overall team success. That being said, for me, I've always been kind of an OPS guy. From a team perspective, it kind of paints a picture in how you're producing runs. It's highly correlated to scoring runs as well, obviously, that and WOBA. So I think if you're looking just for how a team is creating runs offensively, I think OPS has always been something it's pretty straightforward. It's something I've valued. But as you're looking at like getting under the hood and something relative to predicting future performance, and long-term performance, obviously, xWOBA is important too. But I think all of our guys understand OPS, but it resonates with them too.
Rafi's such a special talent, but over the last few years, we've seen the dip from July. I mean, the Julys, if you look historically, OPS-wise, have been unbelievable. But then there's been a dip of at least 250 points from July to August over the past few years, dating back to 2019. Is that something that you look at going into the second half of the year, or as you get ready for the month of August? Do you look at the splits that closely?
I don't personally spend a whole lot of time looking at that. Obviously, I know. It seems like the last few Augusts, there's been some regression in the stat line. I think some of it too is just the time of year in general. Like everything kind of gets compounded towards the end of the year. But like I said before, Rafi takes a lot of pride in making sure he's prepared to play every day. Our strength medical group, obviously, they're on everything too. So. There's no red flags on that, and I'd be honest, I'm not sure if there is one specific thing other than coincidence or outside of that. But all I know is he comes to play every single day.
In terms of Tristan Casas and missing 98 games and then coming back, and you expect a guy to at least take a couple weeks before he gets his feet underneath him, but he came out of the gates pretty hot, but now we've seen him slow down a little bit. What have you noticed about Tristan Casas, when he first came back versus over the last 8-10 games or so?
Yeah, I just think, Tristan came ready to play. Obviously, he's a competitor. He's very talented. He came out of the gate swinging, hit a couple homers, started impacting the ball. I think what it comes down to, again, it comes down to game planning. I mean, you just look at how he's been pitched. Teams have really started to exploit that backdoor breaking ball. They're going to pockets with the fastball that they feel like they can execute, and he's a big part of our lineup in the middle. So teams are pitching carefully to him. I think again with Tristan, it's just about putting himself in position to attack mistakes, and when he does that, just like everybody else, he's putting himself in a position to have success. So again, I think he's a guy that prepares. He's as prepared as anybody. He's as aware of the game as anybody. It's just being mindful of the approach, and then obviously, I think the execution takes care of itself. So, looking for him to continue that stride as we head into the final month here.
Tristan is obviously kind of the one of the first guys up in this like wave of young players who's coming through the system, right? This is, as we've discussed already, a young team. And it is super interesting to think about the adjustments that they're making against the best pitching in the world. For me, I think that we've seen something remarkable this year with Jarren Duran and some of the strides that he's made, both physically and in terms of approach, right? Like, he went from being, from early in the season, driving the balls, line drives to left field, to incorporating that leg kick again and really wailing on the ball. And simultaneously, to me, like a huge thing has been his ability to narrow the chase zone. Like he stopped swinging at those fastballs that were above the strike zone. And that's been a huge part of his success. talk to me about teaching, about like learning at the big league level, and the kind of fine line of, do you start with do you start by shrinking the strike zone and then pursue the mechanical changes like that leg lift to get it more power? Like, how do you, like, what's been the sequence of events for Jarren Duran to have this kind of elite season that he's having?
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, Jarren is one of the hardest working guys that I've come across. Takes obviously a ton of pride in the work that he does every single day. He's extremely consistent, routine oriented. The work he does with Ben Rosenthal, one of our assistant hitting coaches, on the swing, on the approach side, Joe Cronin as well, part of our information group on the offensive side. I think it puts him in a position every day to have success. He leaves the cage every day with a thought process that he's looking to take into the game. So when you talk about approach, he has a really narrow focus on what he's looking to attack and the swing that it takes to get the result that he wants. Right? So if it's a guy with a ride fastball or a guy with a sinker, there's a mechanical, or there's a cue, and then there's a swing outcome that he's looking for, and he attacks it right with conviction. But I think Jarren's story for me, it's, you can't ignore the last few years, right? Like, he built off of a lot of failure that he had early, a lot of inconsistencies that he had early, and he has, through his own resolve and the work that he's put in, he has created this performance for himself. It's by no coincidence, right? He's a extremely talented kid, but it takes another level of perseverance and toughness to keep attacking the game when the game tries to beat you down. And I'm just really proud of the type of player he's become because he's had to push through that. And he's learned to make adjustments along the way. And as that pertains to this year and the season he's having, I think he's built off of a lot of those learned experiences and the things that he tried in the past. And he's even more convicted in the work that he does now. And I think that's what's made him such a special player for us this year.
It's really interesting in the context of thinking about that arc. Like, it's not a fast process. Hitting is hard. And what you're trying to help these guys with is hard. And I remind myself of that with Ceddanne Rafaela a lot, right? Like, where we see that there is, whereas Duran has done a really nice job of shrinking down that area of vulnerability, taking away some of those pitches above the zone. Like, Ceddanne is becoming, I think, in some ways more vulnerable to them as the season progresses. And, it's a reminder to me of the fact that progress is not guaranteed, but when it does occur, it can be a multi-year process. Like, where do you see Ceddanne being in terms of both the swing that he's going to need to be the best version of himself and the approach that he's going to need in order to be the best version of himself?
Yeah, I mean, he's an electric athlete, right? There's no doubt about that. I think Ceddanne, and obviously, as you had just mentioned, right, the season kind of comes in waves. Early on, it kind of feels like now we feel. I guess I'm saying this part of the season kind of has some resembles what he went through early in the year. And I think that happens with a lot of young players that are chasing results or chasing hits more specifically. But I think Ceddanne is, I mean, he's got a lot of power for a guy that has that frame, super twitchy. I think one thing that he learned through the middle part of the season that we're trying to make sure we harp on is understanding how teams are trying to pitch him and the patterns to which teams are trying to pitch him. If he gets mistakes over the middle of the plate, especially when he's on time, I mean, he impacts the baseball. I think where he gets into trouble, obviously, is when he gets led to the trap. And I think teams obviously are looking to exploit that. I mean, it's no surprise. It's expansion off the slider away, four seam up and away, but it's having the discipline to stay away from it as long as you can. And that may mean early in the count, maybe you take a fastball on the outer half of the player on the black because you want to lay off the slider away. And the only way you get better at that is through in-game repetitions and in-game trust. And when you have success, you build off success. So it's obviously something we talk about in the work and the things that we do in the cage. But the reality is there's no greater learning opportunity than in-game. So we're just trying to have really productive conversations when the game happens. Obviously, results matter at the big league level, but we're trying to stay within the process of development too. So it's kind of just balancing those things. But like I said, we've seen it before. We've seen the success he has. There are a few months there where he was OPSing right around 830, 840 for a couple months, and he was controlling the strike zone. But we want to make sure, we're not looking to turn Cedon into some sort of passive hitter. We want him to manage his aggression, maintain a selectively aggressive approach. I think that's important to getting the best out of him.
Pete, I just want to end with this. What is, obviously the offense was among the best in baseball for a while. We're in this 2-week slump. We talked a lot about that. What is your message to Red Sox fans, regarding the offense over the final 3+ weeks of the season?
I think you can't devalue the work over the span of 6 months at the expense of 2 weeks. It stinks. Believe me, we want to score 10 runs a game. We want to be the offense that's leading baseball in runs like we had been for a while. But stay optimistic. That's the way I look at it every single day. These guys are one swing away. They're one swing away. They're 2-out RBI away from getting right back to where we want to be. And that's kind of the message that we have to the group. Stay optimistic. We can control moving forward, and that's what we're focused on.
Stay optimistic sounds a lot like keep the faith, which was a saying around here for quite some time. Well, Pete Fatse, we really appreciate you joining us. I know this is an off day for you. You got the White Sox series coming up at home. Hopefully things get turned around then, but we appreciate your time, sir.
Always, guys. Thank you for having me.
All right.
That one swing away from a better night's sleep.
There you go.
Yeah.
No question about that. All right, Pete Fatse joining us here on the 310 to Left podcast. For Boston Globe's Alex Speier, I'm Adam Pellerin. We'll see you next time.